volunteer my time for the community. Oh, I just got told recording in progress. Got it. Okay. So my name is Mackenzie Walters. I am an attorney. Before going to law school, I taught eighth grade U.S. history. So I have been in the shoes of the teachers at the schools, and I've been on the other end of the line, receiving calls from school districts. We represent school districts all over the state, some large ones, some small ones. But it's important, I'm going to go ahead and say this, I am not the attorney for Dripping Springs ISD. I am just an attorney that lives in Dripping Springs that knows a lot about school law. And also, I'm going to probably be telling some stories, and I promise that none of these stories that I tell, while all of them based on true stories, they are not stories from Dripping Springs ISD. So I'll go ahead and say that to begin. And now I'm going to share my screen so we can get started. Oh, I am not able to share the screen, Rachel.
Should allow you to do it now.
Thank you. All right. So you should be able to see now my screen. What we're going to be talking about today again are parents' rights in schools. Go ahead and skip that. You know about me now. Let's look at what we're going to talk about today. I want to start first with kind of a general idea of how school authority is organized, kind of where do you go to find the rules that apply to schools, rules that are adopted, as statutes, court rules, and even local rules that are adopted by the school board, and all the way down to more kind of localized rules for your campus, such as your student code of conduct and handbook. Next, I'm going to go through some parent rights in some of the common questions and concerns that I see, such as visitation, curriculum, and some other stuff like that. I'm going to talk a little bit about complaint processes, some interesting kind of student rights things like privacy and freedom from bullying and harassment. So I got here the hierarchy of school authority. Basically, the Texas legislature creates, our statutes that are going to apply to public school districts. A lot of time, the Texas legislature asks the Texas Education Agency, hey, we're going to make these rules, and Texas Education Agency, you're the one that's going to make sure these things get implemented, or you're going to create these new things, or you're going to be responsible for monitoring that the school districts are doing these sorts of things that we're going to require by law. Under that Texas Education Agency is going to be each individual school district. The Board of Trustees are kind of guardians. I was going to say kind of guardian of your school. They're not necessarily the ones that are nitty gritty, making the really detailed decisions. They're kind of like the watchdog. They're there to make sure that the right campus administration is doing the right thing, that the school is going in the direction that they want to go, that the school administrators are focusing on the things that they think they need to be focused on, such as, child progress. I know that your school district, particularly with the help of your education foundation, puts a lot of impact on student mental health. And so those are all sorts of things that can be guided by a good school board. I have seen lots of different school boards all over the state. Sometimes I go to a school board meeting and they never talk a day about a child, there's no mention of children or learning or education, and it's all about griping or talking about updating the football field or the track field or how they don't like their property taxes and all those kinds of things. And if a school board is kind of not focused on, education, the purpose of school district, making sure that we have staff and students that are healthy and safe and learning, then, your school board isn't focusing on that, then a lot of time your school district's not doing a very good job of meeting those demands. Your school board hires your school superintendent, and then under your superintendent, the superintendent brings district administration, your campus principals, your teachers, they bring those recommendations to the school board for them to hire. But really, the school board is the boss of the superintendent. And then the superintendent is the boss of the campus, district administration, campus administration. It kind of goes down from there. Your principals and assistant principals, they're going to be in charge of your campus. A lot of times your school campuses will have different, maybe kind of rules and procedures or policies that may be campus specific, but also there's going to be uniform rules. And then your principals, what they're looking at is making sure that your teachers are going through all of their processes that they're supposed to have, that they have the resources they need to be able to create good instructional materials, that they're creating lesson plans, that they're meeting their grading stuff on time, that they're following up with parents, that they are, a lot of times your principals are also dealing with your discipline problems. They're working on scheduling for your STAR exams. Your principals have a lot of things that they are balancing on their plates all at once. And then finally, your teachers are kind of the leader of their individual classroom. They are confined by all of these rules that we've said before, but each teacher has the ability to kind of create a space for, and implement rules for how they feel like it should be implemented. And one of a good example is that, your teachers may all have a little bit different restroom break policy. Some teachers will say you only get 2 per semester. Some will say you don't get any. And some don't care as long as it's within the rules set by the principal. So sometimes your classroom rules are going to be a little bit different depending on your teacher. So I talked a little bit about the Board of Trustees. The board helps make sure that our school district is kind of going through the right direction, that we're focusing on creating a place that helps kids grow, that they feel safe, that they're learning, that they grow up to become good citizens, all of those kind of things. And the school board has to follow, certain legal requirements, and the legal requirements can be found within board policy. If you go into this board policy, specifically this called Policy Online, and I've given you a code so that it can bring you straight to that policy online, or you can search that. Whenever you're looking at these, they are organized by letters. The letters mean nothing. It's just an organization feature. But for example, if I go to the section F, and that's going to be the rules about applicable to students. If I go to policy FNG, that's a specific policy about student or parents' complaints. If I go to FNG legal, I'm going to see the laws that are applicable to students' rights to file formal or informal complaints. If I go to FNG local, on the other hand, those are going to be the individual specific policies that are adopted by the Dripping Springs ISD Board of Trustees. So each school district is going to have these policies, all of their legal policies will be same for every school district across the state, but your local policies are going to be different for each school district. Now, a lot of times they are very similar because you don't want to have to reinvent the wheel every time. And when you find something that works, a lot of school districts will use that, but there are going to be nuances. So when you're looking at kind of the rules that the school board has set for the school district themselves, that's going to be in your board policy.
So, I was just going to ask you, what is the difference between the board policy and the student handbook? But I see that's your next slide. So
that is a great question. Thank you for jumping in. Yeah, so a lot of times the content in your school board local policy is going to be exactly the same or almost exactly the same as the information in your code of conduct and your handbook. The board policy will have more information about a lot of other different things, like advertising on the billboards at football games, like all sorts of policies and rules in there. Your student code of conduct and your student handbook is adopted each year by the school board. It's going to reflect that board policy, but also may have some other additional information. I know that whenever they probably don't even send copies of the handbook anymore on the first day of school. You send home a letter and say, welcome to my class on the first day of school, student. Here's a lot of things for you to go take home to your parents to sign. And then you spend the next 2 weeks bugging that student, please sign this thing and bring it back so I can check that off my to-do list. One of those things is a signed thing from the parent saying, yes, I have read and understood the student code of conduct and handbook and that I can access it on the website. And I agree that if I want a hard copy, I can ask for a hard copy and receive it. That is probably what that form says in some form or fashion. If you do not have a copy or don't know where to go to look for it, again, you can find it on the district website. The code of conduct is going to follow list the types of rules for students. The discipline procedures, a lot of times schools try to follow this kind of escalating disciplinary procedure where, the first time something happens, maybe they get a warning, and the second time they call their parents, and the third time they get after school detention, and then those kind of things keep building up and building up to more severe forms of discipline. Your student handbook, on the other hand, is going to include all sorts of things like parking and access to certain services and your student rights, your parent rights, all sorts of things. The grading procedures, if you are in a place where you're starting to worry about valedictorian or salutatorian, you're going to be able to find those types of rules in the student handbook and in board policy as well. And so to kind of wrap that up, I just want to send a little reminder here. A lot of times, if you have questions about how something is supposed to happen, the student handbook or the student code of conduct, if it's a discipline problem, are really probably going to have the answer to most common questions. If you have some more questions and you don't want to go to school about it, your board policy will have those information as well. They may have even more information. And then, of course, you always have access to your campus principal. You can talk to your teachers if you have other questions. All right, so let's talk about some parent rights. And I'm going to start this with a kind of a reminder that when I am talking about parent, I'm doing this kind of annoying things that lawyers do. Everybody knows what a parent is, but lawyers have to go mess things up, and they make, they define parent in a legal way. So when you hear parent, you think of something. When I hear parent, I hear maybe a little bit of a different definition of parent. So A parent does not necessarily mean a biological parent. When I'm talking about parent here, I may be talking about someone who has legal guardianship over a student. Also, a parent may be biologically a parent, but the court may have taken some of the parent's rights away. For example, I have to review custody documents quite often when there's, when mom or dad shows up at school and says, I want to have lunch with the kid. But we know in the custody documents that, this isn't, the parent's day to have with their kid, or if they're going to pick up the student, but we think, well, that's not, it's Thursday and that's not mom's pickup day. So a lot of times we're looking at what would be a parent, but just because they are a parent doesn't mean that they have all the rights that you would think they'd have. So just kind of a little thought there. And so let's look at visitation. We're going to look at student records, some curriculum and instruction, and formal and informal complaints. So the chapter 26 of the Texas Education Code is called kind of like the Parent Bill of Rights. I've listed a few things here, but there are more within the code if you're ever really interested in looking up the code. But this starts with this sentence that parents are partners with educators, administrators, and school district board of trustees in their children's education. I think that is so important. I see all sorts of, especially when dealing with students, unfortunately, I see a lot of the bad things. I don't normally see the parents and the administrators and the kids that are all getting along, that are doing amazing things, that, helping kids grow, the parents and teachers work together great. Usually once they're calling me, there is a breakdown in communication. People are not, maybe the parent feels like they're not being heard and they're frustrated, and the, educators are feeling, maybe the parent just doesn't understand what they're trying to say. And so, when you kind of have that breakdown in communication, it can lead to that breakdown in trust. And then it becomes really difficult for parents and schools to sometimes kind of find that common ground. So when you're working with your educators, working, with the campus principals, I would just try to remind you that generally people that work in schools are really good people that care about kids. And I know that they are not all the best, because it is my job to find the ones that are not the best and deal with them. And if this was a different presentation, I would have some really crazy stories about that. But you're, working with your teachers, working with your campus principals, working together and remembering that both of y'all really have your child's best interests at heart. So one question I get quite often is a parent's access to campus. Parents do have the right to access campus, but it's can be limited by school administration. You can't just show up anytime you want, come through any door you want, and walk into a classroom and sit down or take your kid out of class. Like, the school is allowed to limit your access to campus. That's why you come through the front door, you sign in when you come to the front door and get a sticker. And so, it's to make sure that your child's instructional day and everybody else's instructional day doesn't get interrupted, that things are consistent, that we're following schedules. If anybody could just walk in at any time, it could be a safety issue, but also a disruption. Speaking of disruption, that is one of the things that I get to deal with quite often. A school can restrict your access and even give you a trespass warning. And if you violate that trespass warning, you can be convicted or charged with trespass. It can be a criminal offense. If a parent is displaying confrontational, aggressive behavior towards school staff. The biggest kind of problems I see with this is the behavior at athletic events. I once had a parent that was threatening the referee at a basketball game and kept coming to the games and kept threatening the referee at the basketball games. It got to a point where the parent was like following the referee out of the parking lot and stuff, and that's just not safe, and it's totally not appropriate behavior at our schools. We don't want people to be unsafe. We also don't want, to try to show our kids that that's okay. And so that's a kind of an instance where you could be asked to leave school. Another example is a parent who perhaps has a meeting with a principal who doesn't agree with the principal and walks out of the office and into the hallways screaming about how the principal's a liar, that you can't trust them, trying to, interrupt classrooms that are close by to the front of the school. Those kind of things, you may be frustrated at the campus principal, but you don't necessarily have the right to act in that way that is going to be disruptive to the school environment. But campus visitation is not always about showing up and being angry at referees. A lot of times campus visitation is really kind of a good thing. Parents do have the right to visit the individual classrooms of their children. You don't get to go to any old classroom. And you can visit during instructional time, but you need to have the approval of the principal and the teacher. And also remember that if duration or frequency is going to interfere with delivery of instruction or disrupt that normal school environment, then the principal or the teacher can decline to give you that permission to come in and view the classroom. And so I'm going to give a couple examples here. I had a student who thought he was the funniest thing in the world, and he really was the funniest thing in the world. It's sometimes really hard when you're a teacher and you've got an 8th grade boy saying things that are, silly, maybe slightly inappropriate, but not so inappropriate that he's in trouble for it. But really, it's just disruptive because he has a witty comeback for every single thing you say, and the boy just won't stop talking. And lunch detention, after school detention, all of those things didn't matter. But if you called his mom, and specifically his mom decided that she would come to his school and follow him around to all of his classes, and he would have to sit next to his mother in all of his classes so that he could feel really, really embarrassed. And hopefully, she hoped that would help him remember to try to control his urge to share all of his thoughts in the middle of class. That's an okay and totally appropriate reason for parents to come in and view instruction. If your kid is giving a presentation and you want to come and watch them give the presentation, that's a great reason to come. Or if your kid is struggling and you kind of want to see maybe what's going on in class and maybe try to help them and work with the teacher and figure out what maybe we could do differently to help the kid not struggle. Those are good reasons. If you want to just come and watch every single day, or you want to watch your kid take all of their tests because you feel like your glare will help them ace the tests, those, a teacher can say, this is disrupting our environment. We're not going to have, I'm not going to let you come in and sit anytime you want. And then the big one, I don't want to be the mean person here, but you do not have the right to throw birthday parties or bring cupcakes. Your little one is totally special, and I get it. But I have had so many calls from schools, from angry parents and angry grandparents, because they have showed up with boxes and boxes full of expensive cupcakes and goodie bags, and they have been denied access to their child's classroom to hand out these cupcakes and goodie bags. And they are saying, no, I have the right to cupcakes in classrooms. Well, not really. Before you go and buy all the cupcakes and goodie bags, I would confirm with your teacher and principal if it is okay for you to bring those. And if they say, no, we are having a test that day, or no, we've got to focus on this kind of instructional thing today, then that's going to be more important for all of the kids in that classroom than it is to disrupt all of that for cupcakes. And then lunch. Lunch is a big one too. I got this straight from the student handbook. Generally, parents, grandparents, and siblings, when accompanied by the school's guardian or the student's guardian, are welcome for lunch but must check in with the office. Okay, so another right that parents have is a right to access of their students' records. This is through the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, also called FERPA. It is a federal law that one, requires schools to keep education records confidential and student personally identifiable information confidential, and also gives parents and students the right to their students' education records. And an education record means basically any kind of record if one, it contains information directly related to the student and is maintained by the school district. So maybe your teacher's like post-it note they write down and throw away later. That may not be an education record, but if it's directly related to the students, maintained by the school district, then it is a student record. And you can ask to receive copies of those records. There's a process to go through to get you those copies. You can also make Public Information Act requests for all other types of records. I've given you there the email address from the school district's website that you can submit information requests. So if there's things that you want to receive copies of, depending on what it is, the school district may have to go through a process to determine if it's confidential and if they have to withhold it. For example, if you go and ask them to send you every correspondence they've ever had with their lawyer, then they're not going to just give that to you because that is confidential information. Also, if you want to receive information about other students, that is likely going to be limited by FERPA. I see this quite often in discipline situations. Perhaps you want to know if the other student that did the same thing is receiving worse or better treatment than your kid, or they receiving the same thing, or you want to see a copy of the fight, the video that caught the fight, or student statements. You may not necessarily have the right to copies of those types of things because it relates to other students, but you may have the right to view it. For example, in a video, let's say your student and another student get in a fight, you can view it because there's not really a way to redact the other student's face out of the video, not with the district software that they have, but you can't receive a copy of it. All right. One of the things I also know that people are interested in, teaching materials. A parent is entitled to review teaching materials and instructional materials or teacher's aids that are used in the classroom. You're allowed to review each test after the test is administered. You can observe virtual instruction and in-person instruction. And also you can request that the school allow the student to take home instructional materials if available. Like, hey, can my student take home an extra textbook so that they have, so they can try to catch up on homework or something like that. I will say though that viewing instructional material and stuff like that is a little bit different than dictating what the teacher can and cannot teach your child. So if for some reason you didn't want your student to learn about the Bill of Rights, like teach the Constitution, but do not teach the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, by golly. You can't necessarily dictate like my kid is going to not be taught that information. Or, you know, my kid should never learn about economics. So my kid is going to sit out for the whole semester of economics and not have to go to that class. You don't get to, you don't have the right to do that, but you can request exemption from instruction for certain excuse me, I am stumbling on my tongue. Exemption from certain types of instruction. So you can remove your child temporarily from class or school activity if it conflicts with the parent's religious or moral beliefs. And all you have to do is write, you know, a written authorization and give it to the teacher. One of examples of that is going to be like exempting your child from the sex ed temporary courses that are going on. I had a student who was a Jehovah's Witness, and there were certain things that they asked to be exempt from. And so instead, I would just we would come up with something different for that student to do so that she was still learning, just doing it in a little bit different way. And like I said, you don't get to do it to avoid a test or to prevent the kid from taking an entire subject that may be required. And now I know that one of the things that is really difficult when it comes to schools and parents, like I said before, is kind of that communication barrier. You may call your teacher and the teacher doesn't get back to you until late in the day, or they don't respond to your emails right away. First, I think it's important to kind of think about what your teacher's day may look like. You know, your teacher is in front of a classroom almost all day long. Before school, they're trying to set up their classroom, or they're going to last minute meetings. During the school day, you're with your kid. They're keeping things engaging. They're making sure that they're following the right kind of processes, that they're differentiating instruction, that they're making sure Billy and Bobby and Jane are all receiving kind of the special attention they need. And so your teachers are not always able to really easily respond to emails and respond to phone calls. And so usually when they get those little chances to do that, it may not always be fast enough or prompt enough. That's one of the things that I see that kind of starts off frustration between parents and teachers. Like, well, you know, I sent her something at 5 o'clock on Tuesday and she didn't get back to me until 7 o'clock on Wednesday, but I needed to know sooner than that. Well, your teachers aren't sitting at their desk all day in front of their computer all day. Another thing that I kind of see that leads to kind of this miscommunication and some kind of frustration, again, is this feeling that like maybe your concerns are not really being heard. And I want to reiterate that your teacher should really be a resource for you if you really are frustrated or concerned about something. But again, your teacher, when I was teaching 8th grade, I had over 160 students. And while you are working really, really hard to provide each of those students with, all of the care and instruction that they need, if I have a parent that's trying to ask me every single day, has Susie turned all of her grades in? The next day, did Susie turn in her homework? And on the next day, did Susie turn in her homework? It's tiring on your teacher to try to keep that level of correspondence up. But on the other hand, your teachers are available for you. You can schedule to have meetings with them. A parent-teacher conference does not have to wait until until you're angry and frustrated and that kind of helpful communication is broken down. Parent-teacher conferences can happen earlier if you feel like that is going to be useful to have that one-on-one conversation to try to figure out what your concern is. If your teacher is, if you've gone through these kind of steps and your teacher is still not helping you, remember that you also have the campus principal that is there. And again, working with your campus principal to try to figure out those things is also an option. But if you still can't make it all work, there is a complaint process. And earlier I mentioned board policy F&G, legal and local. This outlines kind of the rights and procedures for formal complaints. And while I suggest that you always try to work things out informally, do try to work things out as soon as possible instead of letting things linger. And this is because if you do want to file a formal complaint, it has to be filed within 15 days of the date that you knew or with reasonable diligence should have known of the decision or action giving rise to the complaint or grievance. And the form can be, you can get the form from your campus principal for filing a complaint. And really this complaint process is it's kind of a sacred protected type of right that you should be able to bring your concerns and make sure that they get heard. But if you're going that formal complaint process, you can still always try to resolve things formally. That formal complaint process isn't required of you. It's just an option for you. Also, I mentioned F&G, but there are plenty of other policies that for other types of complaints, like for bullying or harassment, or if you have a complaint about a certain type of discipline your student received, there's going to be other types of processes. And you can go to that F&G local policy and see a full list. All right, so let's switch gears here and talk a little bit about student rights. Let's look at searches and privacy. We'll look at speech, bullying, and harassment. So when I often get calls about student discipline that have to deal with student searches and contraband that is found within district property or within the student's property, like their locker or in their car. So this is something that's probably really helpful to talk to your kids about, particularly when your kids get to middle school and high school, that, your students' lockers, their desks, their district provided technology, all of those things can be searched by the district at any time, and they can be held responsible for anything that is found in that property. If a person comes up to them with a weed bag and says, "Hey, hold this in your locker for me real quick," and then they put it in the locker, and then the drug dogs come through the hallway and they hit on your kid's locker, and the kid says, "Well, I'm a good kid. I've never done that. Some kid just asked me to hold it and I was being nice. And so I said, sure, I'll put it in my locker." Your student can still be held responsible for that because, you can't always know the difference between a kid saying, "Well, that's not mine," when it really is not theirs, or when they're just saying it's not mine. So, something you can talk to your kids about. Remember that you're responsible for what's in your lockers. The point when it can get really tricky is when they are being held responsible for things within their own property. I have had this almost exact same call multiple times where a student in a rush, their car doesn't turn on or something, and dad says, "Take my truck, here's the keys." And they get in the car and they drive to school without realizing that there's an 18-pack of Budweiser in the back seat of the car, and it gets reported to campus principals, or the campus principals see it, and then the student is in trouble for having alcohol on campus. I've also had the same kind of call when they take dad's truck and didn't realize that the hunting rifle was also still in the back seat. Or even dad's drugs in the back seat. That happens as well. Or, kids, they're responsible for things that are found in their possession or under their control. This includes their personal belongings and their backpacks, for example, or the vehicles parked on district property. Now, when it comes to searches, particularly of student property, this is where you get kind of into constitutionally protected type rights, right? We know that the police can't just walk into your house and start looking for evidence based off of a whim, right? And that's the same for your school district administrators, but the school is not held to the same kind of higher standard that the police are held at. So if the campus administrator has reasonable suspicion that the search will reveal evidence of a violation of the student code of conduct, then the school district official can search the student. Also, the search can be done, without first calling parents and stuff like that. But generally, I think that most administrators are trying to work to make sure that parents are going to be included. Administrators are not trying to keep things secret from parents. They're trying to make sure that they are doing what needs to be done to make sure that they've got a safe and healthy school environment. All right, student speech. This one is complicated. Students do have the same kind of constitutional freedom of speech rights while they are at school, but that also has to be balanced with the special interests that's created by the school environment, right? If every student was allowed to go around and say whatever they wanted to at any time about anything and create chaos, then it doesn't really, that kind of creates an imbalance between, well, why are we having taxpayer dollars trying to pay for this school that are educating them if they're not, if they're using speech to create mayhem and chaos, right? So that's kind of why we have that balance there. And this it means that all of a student's speech is not necessarily going to be protected speech. Generally, we're looking at, and this is a kind of a legal standard here. If a student expression is materially or substantially interferes with the operation of the school or the rights of others. If student expression promotes illegal drug use, if it threatens violence, or is vulgar or lewd, then this is the type of thing that a student can get in trouble for that can be censored by the school. Also, certain off-campus speech, such as cyberbullying, when brought back to school, that causes kind of an interruption or interferes with the rights of others in the way that it is bullying, could also be something that a student could get in trouble for. You don't necessarily have that argument like, oh, well, a student has freedom of speech, they can say whatever they want on campus. It's not necessarily true. And speaking of cyberbullying, now let's go to look at bullying. When we look at bullying, this is another one of those times when you may have in your mind what the definition of bullying is, and I have a legal definition in my mind. So legally, the definition of bullying, I've got this on the next slide. It's going to be something that's kind of severe. It's going to be something that harms a student or disrupts their educational processes or infringes on their rights. It's not necessarily something like, well, that student was mean to me. Like, well, students are mean sometimes, but being mean isn't necessarily bullying. But when the school district receives receives reports of bullying, they are required to investigate. And that first step of investigation may be just that question: is this kid just mean, or is this kid bullying? And if this kid is bullying, then we go through this investigation process that also requires like notification to parents and stuff like that. If the kid is just mean, the campus principal, for example, may still provide services. They may still reach out and tell parents what's going on. It's just that the school district isn't legally required to do that kind of full-on investigation and notice requirements. And so I think sometimes parents can see how things are responded to a little bit differently. The report of actual bullying is handled one way, but then I say that, you know, so-and-so is being mean to my kid and they didn't do all of those things. And it looks like, well, why aren't they treating these things the same? And it's because legally they may not be required to go through those same kind of processes, but still important that if you're having troubles, that you talk to your teachers or talk to your campus principals to try to make sure that you know, your kid is okay, happy and healthy. Again, our principals don't want kids to be in a place where they are not being treated right by their peers. And so, like I said, define bullying. It's student-on-student conduct exploiting an imbalance of power. It can be a single act or a pattern of actions. It involves verbal, written, or physical conduct that physically harms a student or creates reasonable fear of harm, or creates intimidating, threatening, or abusive environment, or substantially disrupts the education process or infringes on a victim's rights at school. And cyberbullying is all of those things above, but through electronic means of communication. And I have here the QR code to a section on the school district's website that has a lot of really helpful information about bullying and an anonymous reporting tool that students can use to report bullying. Also, they can report harassment. I've got another slide next on harassment. That is, while it's somewhat similar conduct, it's a little bit different. Give you one more chance to take a picture of that if you need it. And all right, harassment. One final little wrap up here. We talked about bullying. Harassment is very similar to bullying, but it's conduct that you know, another person is harassing someone or discriminating against somebody based on a protected class. And while the state of federal law has kind of a more limited idea of what is a protected class, your school district policy actually expands that and protects people on more kind of a broad definition here of a protected class. So we're looking at based on a person's skin color, sex, religion, disability, race, religion, or national origin. If this conduct falls, this conduct could be discrimination, harassment, or retaliation. And that is going to be, if you're wanting more information, you look at FFH policy. Reported conduct that is sexual in nature, that's also going to be FFH, but it's going to follow a federal process of investigation that's created under Title IX. And so harassment, like I said, it's something that the school district is required to investigate, very similar to bullying. You can use that anonymous tip line for reporting suspected harassment. And I think sometimes kids can kind of get to this point where of discrimination or harassment without really realizing it. When I was teaching, I had a student who had his family was Korean, and he was the only Korean in our school. He was very different looking than all of my other students. And in there, they were so unaware of the world and how the world works that they, to make fun of this kid, called him a terrorist, because to them, he wasn't white, he wasn't Hispanic, he must have been a terrorist. We're going to make fun of him for being a terrorist. And so that was something that I had to report, because they were doing that bullying type conduct, but they were basing it off of, in this case, his perceived kind of national origin or race. So that was more than just bullying. It's something that, a student can get in trouble for, and also is just not really the type of culture, student interaction that we want. So harassment, bullying, these types of things, students have kind of the right to have the school step in and investigate, try to give them resources to prevent it from continuing to happen. And so with that short note on bullying and harassment, that's all I have for y'all tonight. I appreciate that y'all gave me the chance to present, and I hope that this was helpful. And I'll finalize this again by saying I am not the school district's attorney, but I do this type of work quite often. I see a lot of crazy things throughout the state, but I will also say that generally your school districts are made up of good people that are really trying to help your kid. And whenever we work together and we try to make sure that we're communicating our questions and our concerns, and then a lot of times your problems can be resolved a lot easier. And so that, Rachel, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much for presenting tonight. If you came in late, we will make this recording available. It's recorded. We'll make it available on the website shortly. I'm not making any promise on when that's going to happen. And also on the website, if you have a teenager, is our previous presentation from the first Tiger Talk of the year called Understanding the Teen Brain. And we will have a spring presentation that's kind of goes hand in hand with that, where we actually work with our teens. It'll be an in-person workshop and work with our teens on better communication with them, presuming that you get your teen in, and they'll work with us, because it's kind of difficult thing to do. But thank you again all for coming. And if you haven't had a chance to join PTA, it's joinpta.org. So please go join your local PTA, as this was brought to you by the Council of PTAs. Y'all have a good night. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.